So I just got done watching the 2018 remake of the classic Charles Bronson film Death Wish. Of course, the 2018 one stars Bruce Willis as Paul Kersey, and wanted to give my thoughts on it. Now, for those of you who have not seen the original 1974 Death Wish with Charles Bronson, that's a classic vigilante film. It's one of the classic vigilante stories that you would never really think would make it in the modern era. And actually, what's interesting about Death Wish, the original and now this remake, is the thing about the original film that came out in 74, and like I said, as far as movies go, as far as being a fan of films, it is a classic. And there's so many movies like it. If you've seen films with Steven Seagal, with Liam Neeson, you've seen a lot of these kind of movies where something happens, like the guys, it's about a guy, his wife gets either killed or beat up or, kidnapped, or his daughter, and he has to get revenge. That's what Death Wish is. And this remake, directed by Eli Roth, is really not that different. It's still the same character, essentially, Paul Kersey and the Kersey family, but things play out a little bit different. I'm glad they didn't do an exact remake, but what I find really interesting about all this is that the timing of the release of this movie is really strange. And again, it goes back to the point I was going to make a minute ago, but I kind of went off track a bit. When the original movie came out, right, in 1974, the movie got a lot of crap. It got a lot of crap from the critics because the film essentially supports not only being a vigilante, but also it supports the idea of citizens doing the cop's job for them. In other words, in the film, both the original and the Bruce Willis one that I just got done watching, Paul Kersey becomes a crime fighter and he does the cop's job for them. And it's interesting because we live in a world now, and back then it was the same thing, but it's actually worse now because nowadays with social media and the way news travels and the controversy going on in the real world when it comes to, weapons and firearms and all the tragedies we've had in the past few years, this movie came out at a very, very bad time, a very sensitive time where this topic is being discussed. And I'm going to tell you right now, so it's an Eli Roth movie, okay? If you know anything about Eli Roth films, you're going to know that this movie pulls no punches, essentially. It's not trying to be politically correct. In fact, the movie's very politically incorrect, especially with how Bruce Willis's Paul Kersey gets his weapon. Getting firearms in the hands of citizens is a whole thing now with legislature, and in this movie the way he actually gets the gun to use in his early early time being a hero is really kind of screwed up, for lack of a better term. It's something that I know for a fact is not going to fly with a lot of people. You're not going to like this. Plus, by the end of the film, without going into spoilers, the movie doesn't really punish Paul Kersey for being a vigilante. It's not one of those things where by the end, even though the movie does have a happy ending, it's not like he regrets what he did or any of that stuff. In fact, with what happens between him and the two cops, it's almost as if the cops were in a way encouraging it. And this movie's going to get torn apart. It's going to get torn apart by the critics. I checked Rotten Tomatoes. It's already at 14%, or actually now 13%. I just checked again. 86% audience, 13% from the tomato critics or whatever. And I'm stunned, but I'm really not. When you see this movie, again, not politically correct, and the original one was controversial, this one may be even more controversial because of what's been going on lately. So the film is essentially about the Kersey family. Paul Kersey is a surgeon in this version of the story. Now, in the original version, the original film, Paul Kersey was an architect. Now, the reason why Eli Roth made him a surgeon in this film, I don't know for sure, is probably because he wanted to play up the duality of a character that saves lives and then takes lives. And I thought that was a really interesting and very smart choice by the creators of this film to go with, because it actually makes sense. So essentially, in both films, but we're talking about this one, there's a break-in to his house and his wife ends up getting killed and his daughter ends up being sexually assaulted. Now, in the original film, his daughter was straight up raped. In this movie, though, it's teased like she's about to be raped, but they never actually hammer home that she was. So I think they kind of were going in that route, but they didn't want to pull a trigger on it, which again, I kind of understand. No pun intended on that. I kind of understand. So what happens is Paul Kersey goes to the cops. He tries to be a stand-up citizen and do the right thing, but the cops are so busy with the increased crime rate, and they just are going too slow, and they can't find these criminals. So Paul himself takes it to the streets to do it himself. And like I said, he gets himself a firearm, and he doesn't do it the legal way, and he actually learns how to clean and load the firearm from watching YouTube videos. And he actually learns how to dispose of evidence by watching YouTube videos, which again I thought was really interesting because again, this movie sort of is teaching people how to do bad things. But we really can't blame the film for being a bad influence, because I'm not the kind of guy who believes in that crap. I think that, movies and video games don't really make us violent. But the movie, again, just a weird timing for this movie to come out. Also, again, the use of social media in this version. The original version of the film was in 1974. This one in 2018, we live in a very different world. There are cameras everywhere. And I was pleasantly surprised that they actually incorporated the cameras into the movie. In fact, there's a scene where, after Paul Kersey does his first, I guess you can call it rescue, somebody captures it on their, phone or tablet or whatever. And then the cops come through and they get the footage. And then there's a kind of a funny scene where they ask her, like, so do us a favor and please don't upload this footage. And she's like, oh, I already did an hour ago and it's getting a bunch of hits. So it's just kind of, the movie sort of parodies, the world we live in now where everybody has a camera. And that's the other funny thing about the movie that I thought was somewhat of a detriment is, in 1974, the idea of a vigilante going, in the slums, I guess you could say, in the alleys, and finding criminals to shoot, that would be a little more viable then than it is now, because nowadays we have increased gun control laws and we have cameras everywhere, not just with cell phones, but also on, street corners and street posts. So I found it a little hard to believe that Paul Kersey didn't get caught sooner in the movie than I thought he would. That was a little off-putting. As far as acting goes and performances, I thought Bruce Willis was fine. I've seen some criticism about it. You really can't compare him too much to the original with Charles Bronson, but I thought it was fine. I thought he was okay in the film. I thought there were some parts where it sounded a little bit forced. Some scenes where he's like, for example, there's a scene where he actually goes into the morgue and his wife's body is there and he's like, baby. And it just didn't really seem too realistic in my opinion, just being real with you on that. But I also felt like in this version of the film, Bruce showed a bit more emotion than the original Charles Bronson movie. I thought with the original Charles Bronson movie, which I do love, I keep saying that, I love the old movie, he didn't really show that much emotion when he found out all these bad things happened to him. In this version, of course, he did. And the thing about this version that I liked is it was more bookended, because the thieves that break into the house to, that end up killing his wife and injuring his daughter, he goes on a hunt for them, and it actually plays up to the very end of the movie. Now, one thing that I think people are going to be criticizing is the final sort of action sequence in the movie, or at least halfway through, I would say. The movie is pretty realistic, I would say, for the first half. And then the second half, the movie does kind of become a bit of a clown show. It becomes ultra violent in some parts, ultra bloody, to where it's almost cartoonish in a way. Sort of like what happened in the third act of Django Unchained. It's very similar to that. But what I knew, it's one of those things where, because it's Eli Roth, and I knew it was Eli Roth, I just accepted it. Like, maybe it's just me because I know the director, I know his style, but Eli Roth does things like that. You know what I'm saying? He does over-the-top kind of quasi-camp stuff. And really, when you look back at Death Wish, the original, it was kind of a violent film, but it was a bit campy as well. It wasn't totally serious in the way that Bronson took out these guys. Same thing here. I know that I'm probably in the minority, but I had a good time watching this movie. I was not bored. I didn't really care about the real world politics, because I don't think it's fair to criticize a film based on what's going on in the real world. It's, I talk about timing and whatnot. It isn't fair. When they made this movie, they didn't know it was going to be, this bad right now when it came to stuff like this, even though it had been going on for a while. It's just one of those things where I can't blame the movie for coming out at an awkward time. The movie is not perfect, though. I thought the movie was fine, though. I wasn't bored. I enjoyed the majority of it. By the end of the film, it became a big cartoon show. I didn't really know what it was, but I didn't hate it. And a lot of people hated this movie, and I didn't. Other than Bruce Willis, though, every other actor is pretty damn wooden in the movie. I will criticize that. Also, the movie is not the best vigilante movie. I mean, I think John Wick is just as good, if not, well, not just as good. John Wick is actually much better than this movie. And there's tons of Liam Neeson films and Steven Seagal movies. I mean, there's rack 'em up. They're out there. So this is not, to me, a film that you have to rush out and see. But if you can get your hands on the original 1974 one, I don't know if it's on Netflix, but if it is, definitely watch that one. But to be honest, this one to me was not a waste of time. I didn't hate it, and a lot of folks did. Just my opinion. Let me know what you think in the comments. Did you like the 2018 Death Wish? I felt it was an unnecessary remake. I've always felt that way. I think most remakes are unnecessary, but going into it, I was like, it's been, 4 decades or whatever. Fine. I'm done with remakes. I really am. This was not terrible, but I don't know if it's really worth you. My job is to basically convince you to spend your money or not, and I would probably say see a matinee. See it during the day when it's cheaper. I would not pay like full price for it because it's good. I had fun watching it, but there's better movies out there right now to watch, and there's better vigilante movies out there, but it's definitely very interesting timing with the movie. Anyways, thanks so much. Let me know in the comments what you thought about the movie, and I'll see y'all very, very soon.